Welcome back on Guard Army. Lorcana is here, and over the course of the past 2 weeks, Lorcana HQ has been hosting a tournament where players battle it out over the course of 6 Swiss rounds, playing 1 round every 48 hours, into a top 8 cut. The meta has developed a bit since then, but the results of this tournament were a tad surprising. With 2 Ruby Sapphire, 2 Ruby Amethyst, 1 Ruby Emerald, 1 Steel Emerald, 1 Emerald Amethyst, and 1 Ruby Steel making top 8, it was a tad surprising to see that no Amber decks made top 8. Today we are going to be going over the lists from 8th to 1st, and see why they built their decks the way they did, and what came out on top. In 8th, we have Zero the Hero's Ruby Sapphire control list. With the powerful ramp of Sapphire with Grandma Tala and Mickey, and the ability to control the board with Ruby's cards like Aladdin to drain lore from your opponent, and be prepared to board wipe, and then keep banishing or sending characters to the ink with the effects of Maleficent and Hades, this is a very powerful archetype. The main weakness of this color combination is the lack of efficient draw. The main draw this deck has is Develop Your Brain to look at the top 2 cards, draw one of them and send the other to the bottom, and Robin Hood, which allows you to draw a card if your opponent has more cards in hand than you do. And considering how much you have to play down your hand in this deck, it's almost always drawing you a card. In addition to the main pieces of this deck, there's also removal pieces such as Dragonfire, Let It Go, Maui to be able to rush into big threats, and the before-mentioned Be Prepared, Hades, and Maleficent. There's also a lot of high lore characters, such as the low-cost cards like Aurora and Jasmine, who both lore for 2, and Maleficent, who lores for 3 for 5 ink. The other utility this deck has is Shift Aurora to give other characters ward, Shift Jasmine to be able to heal your other characters, and Scar, who can drop your opponent's attack for a turn to swing for free into them with something like Maui. In 7th, we have Lao Shi Mahan's Ruby Sapphire Tamatoa control list. This deck features the same color combination as the last, but with a vastly different build of the deck. This build puts a ton of items into play early in the game while ramping up with 1 Jump Ahead, Grandma Tala, and Mickey to be able to be prepared as early as possible, and then drop Tamatoa in the late game to be able to lore for a ton with all of the items you put into play beforehand. This deck still plays Maui, Dragonfire, Hades, and Maleficent for removal, and Develop Your Brain and Robin Hood for draw, but now has Maurice for the ability to put more items into play, and items like Scepter of Ardendael to give character support, Shield of Virtue to protect your characters after they lore, Magic Golden Flower to heal, Poisoned Apple to exert characters or banish a princess, Fishbone Quill to ramp more, Sword of Truth to banish a villain, and Eye of Fates to increase the amount you're able to lore for. I would definitely consider adding an Aerial that untaps whenever you play an item to this deck in order to lore for even more in the late game. In 6th, we have Just Inkit's Ruby Emerald Tempo list. The objective of this deck is to consistently lore for more and more throughout the game, while using a lot of disruption to slow down your opponent's tempo. You have Corella DeVille, Genie, and Mother Knows Best for bouncing characters back to hand, Flynn Rider for discarding cards from their hand, Cheshire Cat and Cusco for trading with whatever banishes them, Jasper to prevent specific characters from questing, Maui, Beast, and Dragonfire for removal, Pongo, Hans, and Genie for safe lore with evasive, Mad Hatter for a little bit of card draw, and LeFou to ready characters to protect them. The main weakness of this deck is again, draw. This color combination has so many amazing tricks, but with Mad Hatter being your only form of draw, you may run out of resources. However, I do think with Cusco having ward and being unable to be affected by targeted removal, it is very hard to outrace this deck in terms of lore. And I also feel like a few Shield of Virtue would make this deck even stronger as well. In 5th, we have Joe Ramirez's Ruby Steel midrange deck. This deck is amazing at consistently removing characters from the board. With Steel's hefty amount of removal such as Fire the Cannons, Smash, Grab Your Swords, Hans, and Shift Tinkerbell, it's hard for players to keep their characters on the board unless they have ward. They also have Red's removal such as the hefty low-cost Gaston, Dragonfire, and Be Prepared. In addition to all of this removal, they also have Beast for item removal, and characters like Tekka and Aladdin who gain lore when they banish another character in a challenge. And Simba who can hit evasive characters and swing for a massive 8 damage with Challenger 4. They also have big late game lore cards such as Mickey Mouse with evasive, and Maui with the hefty stats of 8 power and 8 willpower. The main weakness of this deck is decks that have a lot of toughness and healing or ward. This deck does have good draw in Simba and Tinkerbell, which can draw and discard a card, and more importantly, a Whole New World, which lets both players discard their hands and draw 7 cards. This deck may also struggle against decks that play big late-game cards that can outlore them, but the sheer amount of removal in this deck makes it very threatening. In 4th, we have Mebibite's Steel Emerald midrange deck. This deck utilizes a lot less removal than the previous deck does, but makes up for that in other tricks. They have the Hans and Shift Tinkerbell for removal, but now also have Genie and Mother Knows Best to bounce characters for tempo, Flynn Rider to discard cards from their opponent's hands, and Cheshire and Cusco for trading with anything that banishes them. They also have Tinkerbell for some safe, evasive lore. This deck gives up a little bit of the removal power from the previous deck, while gaining some of the tricks Ruby Emerald has, but also obtains better draw than Ruby Emerald with Simba, Beast Mirror, and a Whole New World in addition to Mad Hatter. They also have Mother Gothel for the late game, because when she's exerted, other characters can't quest, meaning they're forced to swing into her to remove her, which can be the tempo swing you needed to close out the game. In 3rd, we have Franz's Amethyst Emerald Tempo deck. This deck is similar to the Ruby Emerald list, but in exchange for a little less removal, the deck has a ton more draw. Amethyst has some of the best draw in the game. With both Maleficent and Friends on the other side, you are able to draw a lot of cards for not a lot of ink. Maleficent drawing a card on entry and then being able to sing Friends on the other side for free on the next turn helps you to be able to have a lot more options compared to your opponent. This deck also has Befuddles for early game tempo, and Mother Knows Best and Genie to continue bouncing characters back to your opponent's hand as the game progresses. Elsa and Zeus are also a good combo for being able to tap an opposing character and rush into it. You also have big lore characters in the mid to late game like Cusco and Mad Hatter. Then you have late game cards that throw off your opponent's tempo a ton, like John Silver, which can give your opponent's characters Reckless to prevent them from questing, and Mother Gothel, who prevents all opposing characters from questing while she's exerted. In 2nd, we have Steadfast Amethyst Ruby Control deck. This deck wants to control the board as much as possible in the early game to slow down the opponent by using Befuddles and low-cost cards that uptrade with other characters efficiently, such as Gaston and Rafiki, and use Maleficent, Ursula's Cauldron, Magic Mirror, Friends on the Other Side, and the Queen to consistently draw cards throughout the entire game. And then when you get to 7 ink, you be prepared to board wipe and then finish the game with the high-cost characters that swing heavily and consistently to remove opponent's threats. Aladdin lets you swing the lore race by basically stealing 2 lore from your opponent. Elsa can tap down 2 characters that could be questing for game. Maleficent removes a threat from play and is able to do 2-for-1 trades very efficiently, and Mickey Mouse is just a big evasive guy that lures for 4. When this deck gets to their in-game, it is very hard to close out the game against them. And finally, in 1st, we have another Amethyst Ruby Control deck by Walter Jensid. This one is very similar to the previous one, but runs less items and is running heavy Jetsam to be able to combat evasive threats. This one also runs Sergeant Tibbs as a 1-cost that can trade with other characters in the early game, and Ursula to be able to drain your opponent for 1 lore and draw a card in the late game. Having the massive willpower of 8 allows it to take hits very well, meaning that it is really hard to get rid of Ursula before it lures once or twice. Other than that, this deck plays a little heavier on the late game cards and doesn't play any of the 3-cost Elsa, so they need to be a bit more careful with their mulligans, but in the end, Walter is the player that came out on top of 45 players over the course of 2 weeks worth of games. So congratulations to Walter on piloting this deck very well. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Shoutouts to Lorcana HQ for hosting this tournament and their amazing community of Lorcana players, and to Walter Jensid for winning. He's also posted a video going more in depth on the list that he piloted to win the tournament. I'll have links to that and to Lorcana HQ in the description. Be sure to like the video to let me know if you enjoy this type of content, and subscribe if you want to see more. If you all like the Lorcana content, I'll probably start alternating between Pokemon and Lorcana content. Let me all know down below in the comments section which one of these top 8 lists you like the most, and I will catch you all later.